Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today I am excited to talk to you about Ex Machina Deluxe Edition Volume 3, or trade paperbacks 3 and 4, or single issues 21 through 29, and special number 3.
Yep.
Actually, I'm going to start in reverse order with special number 3.
We'll get there. I do want to say, these are generally, the deluxe editions are generally two trades smashed together. 3 and 4, but I was checking up, and if you do happen to have those single trades, the original trade paperbacks, volumes 3 and 4,
Vertigo ones,
Wildstorm. At this point, they might have been Vertigo. They might have been Wilds at this point. Not quite certain, but the special number 3, also called the Halloween special for obvious reasons. If you've read it, I think that's actually included in original trade volume. Maybe like 6 or 7 or something like that. I don't understand why. Maybe that's where they felt that it needed to go. I don't know why. There's no real reason for it, but it's not actually included if you had volumes. What are we on, 5 and 6 here?
Thought it was perfect where it was my reading.
It absolutely was, and I think that's closer to publication order, which is why they're put there. I think it was closer to that. But for whatever reason, when they put out these volumes, it wasn't a part of that. And I think it was included in what was reprinted as original trades, I think 7 and 8 maybe. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it fits, and it fit the rhythm of this edition. Interestingly enough, coming off of last week, when we talked about some of the kind of chaotic nature of what these stories arcs were and like how long they were. I do think this was interesting in that there was you started off on a very kind of politically oriented little arc.
Right.
Then there was a standalone Bradbury story. And then we got I think it was another 4 issues that was fairly supernatural-esque focused, And then that wrapped, and then you got the one shot at the end, which was the special, which I guess you want to start there, special number 3.
Well, I just wanted to say that in an ongoing series like this, I know it's normal to sub out artists.
Yeah.
But I really felt it in that one.
Okay.
It felt not bad. It just felt like, oh my gosh, I've become so spoiled to the hard work that Tony Harris has done to be present for every single issue in the serialized run, that like even a little change to Hundred's appearance, I was like, wait, who is that? And then I was like, oh, that's 100.
And I think that's why these issues, like the specials 1 and 2, which we talked about last week, were drawn by Chris Sprouse. He has a style that is a little more comparable, I guess, on the art spectrum to Tony Harris.
Yeah,
special
Jean
3,
Paul Leon.
Yeah, special 3 and
different.
special 4, Jean Paul Leon, the late great Jean Paul Leon, who is among my favorite artists. The work that he did in his career while he was alive is I love his style, but it is a radical departure from kind of the.
So that's why I was very clear.
Yeah.
I was like, it was in no way bad. It was just a little jarring after sitting and binging, 9 straight issues of Tony Harris art. I feel like the cast of characters I've now spent, 29, 30 issues with, and to have him and his deputy look a little different, and then luckily he got to hide a lot of Hundred's appearance behind the whole Invisible Man trope.
Well, yeah, that's the setup of the whole issue,
right? It's genius, and I loved it. I don't think that was to like hide that there was a different artist. It just worked out really well.
Well, yeah, it was. I mean, again, it's special 3. It is, again, it's called the Halloween special. In fact, it might even say that on the cover. It might say Halloween special. Listed as special number 3. Because then that's the whole conceit behind the
Masquerade. I mean, it clearly is
it's set on Halloween. The whole point is it's the idea of using a mask for anonymity, and obviously the kind of the main line, the concurrent storyline is about the KKK looking to get a permit for a rally, and that's juxtaposed with the early days again of right after Mitchell's accident, when his face is all scarred and his bandaged up exactly like the what we think of when we think of the Invisible Man, and that does lead to the very funny interaction at the little grocery store, the bodega there, where
Yeah, but it's
the
also like, I mean, this is like it has like real Batman Year One vibes,
yeah,
where it's
yeah,
like, you go out uh and realize that, you've got an ability to stop things going on around you.
yeah,
And are like, okay, I guess I'll try this, but you don't really have a great plan yet. You haven't thought of every contingency.
yeah,
He's not wearing bulletproof armor or anything like that, like
yeah.
we've seen in his full costume.
Mhm.
He's just a guy in bandages who can talk to machines,
and
and
and, and even
even it didn't seem like
he knew
he
the
was that
extent of
in
it. Yeah,
tune with it, right?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, no, he
yeah,
was he was speaking, and the gun heard him
yeah,
and stopped or froze.
yeah,
Um, yeah, please don't shoot. Uh, and the shotgun doesn't fire.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I just thought that was so cool. I didn't need this. I mean, this is kind of like perfect special territory. Like,
yeah.
I didn't need it. I wasn't curious, like, oh, I wonder how he went from guy in an accident to this. It's like, I have a vivid imagination. I've read a lot
Yeah.
of comics. I
Yeah.
can kind of imagine where it went, but I did like just kind of sliding it in here as a little pocket story.
Well, and you also know we know enough about Mitchell's own upbringing that comic books and superheroes play a big part in the way he grew up. So
Right.
it was, getting those little bits of flashbacks. You're right. It was obvious that this was something that he would try to do. And of course, also in this, in the back half there, we got that final, I mean, maybe it might have been early on, but in this deluxe edition, we got what that final kind of breaking point for him was, right? Because we know at some point he gives himself up, he stops doing it, runs for public office. We know that caused a wedge between him and Kremlin, because obviously we see Kremlin is scheming behind the scenes to try to get him to come back to become the Great Machine. And then we know that Bradbury was the third guy in there and sticks with them, but we see what that conversation was. We get that specific flashback. So with this special here at the end of the decision, we get what you assume is the first time he tried to use his powers for good, kind of unexpectedly, because he was, he got robbed and he lost like the one thing he cared about, which was this pocket watch, and
Right.
his powers allowed him to come and find it. So we saw that. And then we saw the end there. And we also got multiple flashbacks to September 11th to see what happened on that day. So a lot of gaps really got filled in here for his time as the Great Machine, filled in before, we kind of see him starting and then trying. Interesting thing I've clocked here, having read so much of this in a binge format for this show. Every time we flash back to him as the Great Machine, aside from September 11th, like his time, anytime the date's like late 2000, early 2001, right?
Right.
Every time we see him trying to do anything, I think it's notable that he never seems to get any better,
Right. Yeah.
His gear gets a little better, like it's Kevlar, he's bulletproof. He gets the ray gun from Kremlin. His gear gets better.
The team is very invested in it.
Yes,
And that's really the ultimate schism, right?
Yeah,
is like,
yeah.
which we already know. We know that
his
heart's not really in it.
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like he gets any better at this, and it doesn't seem like through as long as he did this, which I don't, the exact time is maybe like less than a calendar year, but at no point does the public perception of him ever change. So let's say he's the Great Machine for like 8 or 9 months or something. So people in New York know who he is. He's flying around. He's trying to save people. At no point does anyone seem to believe him that he's trying to save people, to the point where we get that flashback on September 11th when he calls for help from the fighter jets. The fighter jets show up and they lock on him because they think that he sent the first plane into the tower.
Right.
No one can get over the fact that this guy is trying to do good. He's trying to help, and he doesn't seem to be getting.
But
he doesn't
that's
seem
like
to be doing better.
real to earth, right? It's like
yes, yeah,
100%. You see a
but
terrorist attack, and there's a guy flying around.
but
What are
Yes.
people supposed to think,
Yeah.
especially law enforcement? It's like you got to lock down all the variables, and that guy's a
Yeah.
variable.
Well, I get that too, but just 6 months ago, this guy was flying around, and then he unmasked himself and said, "This is what I'm doing," and now I'm running for mayor. Everyone knows who he is, you know. So in this skewed version of the world, it is just. I think there's something notable there. I think about every time we go back to Kremlin, obviously we get we get that kind of, I don't even know if the C or the D storyline. We're dealing with the aftermath at the end of last book with Journal's death, right? And now we see her sister January has kind of assumed her position in Mitchell's, in the mayoral office. But we find out that she's secretly working with Kremlin, right? And Kremlin's whole thing is we have to. It seems like January's thing is she wants to get Mitchell out of office, and Kremlin's thing is he has to realize that he could do more good as the Great Machine, and this is his destiny, and
But
he's
we
convinced on that. But again, every
let
time
me
we see him
ask
as
you
a Great
though,
Machine, he's not very good.
right? But do we ever get? No, it's not. Yeah, I think it was not that Mitchell was the Great Machine. It's that he was part of the Great Machine team, and Kremlin is
Well,
like,
yeah,
that was my
yeah,
purpose. You robbed
yeah,
me of my
yeah.
purpose.
In Kremlin's mind, yes, he's doing this for.
But do we
He's
get
doing it for Mitchell.
January's motive? I assumed, like, me filling in the
Well,
gaps was like she blames him for her sister's death.
yeah. Well, I think
Kremlin approached her
yeah,
and she's like, great, we'll get this guy out of
I,
office.
I think you can read between the lines a little bit there when she's saying, like, this is the last election you'll ever win or something like that. Like, we have to isolate him and exterminate anyone who's not on our side. She has a little more violent language, aggressive language, and Kremlin is more just like, I don't care about elections. We have to convince him that he does more good as the Great Machine than as the mayor. And you get the sense that he in January, while seemingly temporary aligned, maybe not fully aligned on the end goal. Because I don't think January has any.
Right. I think they're
Like,
working their own agendas. And
yeah,
and what Kremlin's doing was my conclusion at the end of the last deluxe edition. If you recall, I was like,
yes,
it
yeah,
seems like all of these things are stacking up to frustrate him,
yes,
with his life and the way things are going and the way his chosen path is working out. And it probably makes the Great Machine seem that much more appealing.
oh,
But now
definitely,
that you see
definitely,
the backstory of like when he decided to quit and how he did it, that he,
yeah,
I mean, it's really a rough move to like reveal your identity to a political consultant
yeah,
and like do some like polling and say like, no, I've
yeah,
already irreversibly stuck my foot
yeah, yeah,
in this pond,
and then
and
go
now
back
I'm
to
going to
your
break it
team.
to the team.
Yeah,
What the
exactly.
heck?
I
I
know.
mean,
Yeah, yeah,
which I guess he knew how they would feel about it and was like, I'm going to do it in a way that they can't talk me out of it. But it's like, yeah, man, that's like villain origin stories. That's like, that's where this stuff comes from.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. And as a comic book reader, you would think that Mitchell would know better than that. You know, like that's that. Um, can he? You can't blame him for what he's doing now, because Kremlin is Kremlin. But at the same time, you had to know what the reaction was going to be. You
he
know?
knew. Yeah, he
Yeah,
knew
yeah, yeah,
because he
yeah.
behaved in a way that was kind of a middle finger to everything they
Oh,
were doing.
totally, absolutely,
And yeah,
absolutely.
pretty callous move, which makes him a good politician, I guess. And speaking of good politician,
Yeah,
we should get into the political beats.
sure,
Um,
sure.
and we've got another 3-issue social issue, right? The
Yeah,
pot smoking comes up.
yeah,
We find out that he's still a habitual
yeah.
pot smoker, which
I,
is like, has anything made more sense? The guy
well,
who
yeah.
hears every machine in the world
So
and cannot unwind and
did
works
you
nonstop.
take it? So you read that way as well, right?
I
That
took it as like he's got a stash at home.
because that's the only way he can quiet. He has any escape, right? It's not.
Yes,
It's
right.
not just getting high.
No, I think it's medicinal,
Yes, 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 yes. That's exactly how I read it. It's like how
but
you talk to.
self-prescribed and illegal.
Well, yeah, of course. Well, yeah, it was back then, 20 years ago. This is one of those, some of the issues we've
Nothing's
talked
changed.
about.
Everything's changed. Yeah,
This, no,
Romans.
but this is actually one where this issue is now moot, especially in New York City. Like,
But especially when you compare it to the Juliana reign that
Oh
he's
yeah.
talking
Oh
about,
yeah.
where it was
Oh
like
yeah. The
you're
stop and frisk. Yeah.
incarcerating
Hmm.
mass amounts of people
Oh
over
yeah.
this.
Well, and all of the points they brought up about the mass incarceration, the illegal searches, um, mandatory sentencing, all of that stuff. Those were all the talking points um, for the quote unquote war on drugs that people have been having for this whole time, specifically around. I mean, maybe not specific around marijuana, but that was one of the things of like, dude, we're locking people up for an exorbitant amount of time for having a little weed. Like, what are we doing here? And again, you know, in the past 20 years, the majority of the country, the mindset and the understanding around cannabis and around marijuana has changed and shifted to the point now where, a lot of the issues they talk about in those first three issues, again, just don't exist. Versus, let's say, some of the hot button issues that they were talking about in the previous couple deluxe editions, right? Like, obviously, the terrorism, the
Right. Well,
profiling.
and gay marriage.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Marriage equality.
it's like,
Thought we had that one, maybe not that. I don't know. And then even in this
as
one
of this
here,
recording,
yeah,
we're we're good. Like,
yeah,
legally, we're good.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
There is like the whole backlash,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which, it was another interesting one where like that was predicted in a West Wing episode, actually one that Brad
yeah,
Whitford wrote, where he had the vice president say, like, if you try to force this through now, it's going to be backlash. It's going to be 20 years. Country isn't ready for it in X amount of time. And from the time that episode aired, it was the amount of time the vice president said in that episode.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
validating Bradley Whitford as a
yeah,
prophet, I
yeah.
think.
Well, but I think some of those issues, like marriage equality, specifically like marijuana and cannabis use, those are ones that I think if you saw the trends, you could see the tide was turning. And
Right.
yeah, there was, and there's a frustrating aspect, I think, to progressives when it's like, well, if we're going to get there anyway, let's get there now. And it's like, well, it doesn't quite work that way,
Right.
like, if we all know we're going to get there in X amount of years, that only works because we take X amount of years to get there. You can't skip the line and force it through now. Like that episode said, that West Wing episode was like, you can't force it through now because that isn't the process. People need the time, and so it is fun to go back. And I remember when I first read Ex Machina, handful of years back, we still hadn't made that turn around cannabis and marijuana. It was still something that was still on the outside. So reading that was still like, oh, we're having these same arguments. At the time, it was like, gosh, we're still having these arguments, 7, 8, 9, 10 years on. But here we are 20 years on, and we finally gotten past that one. So, that's one maybe now people will read and be like, that's right. Remember how we were locking people up for 20 some odd years because they had a couple of joints in their pocket.
Yeah. It does. I would say, last week, I think we even got some jokes back at us on Twitter or Blue Sky or something about, I think our social media post had something about all the 2000s nostalgia in this book.
Yeah.
And I was like, is the nostalgia good and bad? And I can't remember who it was. Somebody said, like, so all the characters have frosted tips. And I was like, actually,
Oh,
graciously.
that was Andy. That was Andy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Shout
Andy.
out.
I was like,
Shout out our guy
graciously, no, they do not
Yes.
have frosted tips. But there are so many language things that are jarring.
Oh yeah.
And it feels regressive. And then there are a few pie in the sky, ambitious, like, marriage equality and pot legalization.
School vouchers was in the first one as well.
Right.
Yeah, there was.
But at
yeah,
the time, those things felt like liberal fantasy. And
totally.
now,
Yeah.
if you're in high school now, you really don't remember, marriage equality being an issue, which is bonkers to me.
Yeah.
Because it was like not even on the table for discussion when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And then it was like within 2 election cycles, it was like,
there.
this
Yeah.
is the norm. Yeah. This is like, not only is it the norm, it's like liberals had been pushing for it. Most conservatives that I knew really didn't care one way or the other. I mean, they were kind of libertarian about social issues. They're like, fiscal conservatives are the ones that I know.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
people that weren't like trying to legislate, every aspect of life. So they're like, yeah, I guess I'll fall in line with the party view until the majority of the country shifts, and then they'll just, shift right along with them. It was
Yeah, it
really
was.
interesting to watch it all unfold. And I think, I think Hundred's deputy is smarter than he is, and you almost
Yeah.
wonder
Oh
if the
yeah.
roles should be swapped. Because I
There's
think
no.
Hundred would be like the Josh Lyman, like the Rahm Emanuel, like enforcer,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
he just works around the clock. He's got endless drive,
yeah,
bulldog like tendencies,
yeah.
not a lot of, I was gonna say not a lot of PR savvy. How would you rate his PR savvy?
Well, and every time we see him, it's in a crisis, and he, you get the sense that he is a loose cannon.
Right. He has knee
And
jerk reactions, but he
yeah, yeah,
always knows how to spin it.
he
Or
really
he has
does.
the people around him, which is
Yeah,
what
they do.
January says.
Yeah,
She's like, he
January.
is surrounded
Yeah,
by smart people who
yeah,
won't let
yeah.
him make
Well,
catastrophically stupid
yeah,
decisions.
exactly. I think Wiley is it's Wiley and Candy, and now it's January. But yeah, he has people who are better at this than him. But yeah, I think the whole idea, and you have to imagine though, because you can so picture this, that his roughness, or at least his less polishedness with the media, was part of how he got elected, right? He was a civil servant,
Right.
regular guy, got into an accident, tried to be a superhero, came out and is like, no, I can do more good as a public servant. He got the regular guy vibe, right? That had to be what they projected, you
It's
know?
the Joe the Plumber vibe.
Exactly. Yeah. The
Yeah.
guy you want to have a beer with. The guy who was just working, who his dad was a blue collar guy, building tunnels. This is as regular of a normal dude as you could have gotten, lifelong New Yorker who loves this city. And yeah, that they leaned into that when clearly he is obviously not that, but he has a bit of a temper and a bit of a hair trigger. And I think
And
you're
he's not like a Mensa level IQ.
no,
He's
no,
not,
no, no,
he's
no.
like smart enough to be a civil
Yeah.
engineer.
He's
Um,
savvy enough, and well, and also he's savvy enough politically to know, I think, what he's supposed to say, but maybe in the moment, because he rarely says the wrong thing, you know. He just, I don't know, he curses at people when, and we don't like our politicians to tell people to like F off and stuff like that, but like he'll do that, so that's kind of his vibe, that I don't know, he's not, as January relays, to Kremlin, like you said, he's not making the catastrophic mistake. He's not making anything that would, he's
yeah,
not
but
saying
he
anything.
feels like he's dying a death by a thousand cuts. There
Yeah,
is a point, I think, toward the end of four where he just lists off, like,
yeah,
man, I'm just getting hammered from the left on this. I'm getting hammered from the right on this. It's
yes,
like,
yeah, yeah,
welcome to being an independent. No
yeah.
one has blind party allegiance to you.
There was something where he was like, yeah, so maybe he was talking with Journal, or with January, when he's basically saying like, listen, so far we've been in office, like I've pissed off, like, what was it was like, like teachers, snowplow workers, he lists the whole thing off, and it's like, and even fortune tellers somehow, it's like everyone's coming after him for not, again, not doing anything overtly, quote unquote, wrong, or any like misdeeds on either side. He just, yeah, I think you're right. It's the idea of being the independent, the centrist independent, that trying to attempt to please all sides means you're just going to make someone mad on one of the flanks, and it could be for,
And I
you know,
think you have a little more margin for error. Like you can step out of line with your party when you're in a party,
yeah,
and so many people will have a blind party allegiance that they'll
yeah,
rationalize your out of
yes,
stepness.
yes, yes,
Whereas I don't, and I've never seen an independent ascend to that high a power before. I think
yeah,
the
it's again,
closest I've seen it would be like technically Bernie Sanders was independent for a long time.
yeah,
When he actually wanted to run, he decided to
yeah.
fall in line with the party and then push the bounds of that
Yeah.
party. But
Well, Joe
he didn't run for
Lieberman,
president.
Joe
Joe
Lieberman
Lieberman was
was
another
an
one.
independent, but he always he caucused with the Democrats.
But I was
You know,
thinking of wasn't Ron Paul, not Rand Paul, but Ron Paul, his dad was an independent senator, which
Oh yeah, yeah,
Not
yeah,
not
yeah,
many of those.
yeah. I mean, Ross Perot was third party, whatever you want to call, not aligned with either. But yeah,
Yeah,
you're definitely right that the idea of if you say you're a Democrat or you're a Republican and you do something that the majority of the party or parts of the party think are against the party line, there are ways that you can spin that. If you're claim neither and trying to run down the middle, the minute you do something that one side or the other doesn't like, the claim is, oh, the right can be like, well, you're not independent. You're clearly too liberal,
right, right.
and then the left can be like, look how conservative he is. He says he's independent, but he's not, So yeah, there's no hiding, and there's no one who has your back. I think that's what it is, right?
Yeah,
There's
that's
no
the real killer.
Yeah, there's no one there that when you make a misstep or a perceived misstep, there is no group that can help you spin it. He's always on his own. I think kind of going back to the question we talked about last week of like, is he a good mayor or a good politician? Again, I think you were right to say those things are probably different things. He may or may not be a good mayor, but he does seem to be a fairly good politician, you know?
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, and I think he's like I think the complicated thing about him as a character is that he's always more altruistic than he seems. Like I think the way he
that's
comes
good.
off in the
Yeah.
media is like very pandering, very trying to please both
Mhm.
sides. And when you hear him in private conversation, he works tirelessly
Yeah.
for the public good.
Because we, the readers,
We
have
the
more
reader
than,
knows
yeah,
like what's actually
versus
in his head.
actual citizen of his city.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and I think that is a pretty interesting because that's kind of the inverse of most political characters in shows and movies and books,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Usually it's how altruistic can I make myself look while
Yeah,
having this secret agenda. He's like the mirror image of that.
yeah.
And I think it makes him complicated. And by the way, one of the things that I was complaining about last week was how these runner plots would be disjointed.
Mhm.
Uh, this week, at least in this first arc, the smoke one,
Yeah,
it's two different kinds of smoke. It is
yeah.
literally a woman setting fire to herself
Hmm.
and the smoking issue.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it's a firefighter, doing
Yes.
this. So it's like
Yeah,
all things relating to smoke.
yeah. Smoke and
It's
fire, and
it's
yeah,
like a thin thread. It's not like a very meaningful one, but at least they're like tied together in some way.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
little superficial, but I thought Smoke might have been my favorite story arc so far.
I agree. I think it's my favorite. Um,
I felt like it
and
was
I
everything working, and it was
Yes.
far enough into the series where I have let go of my like I have an inherent when I know that a series is completed, I am waiting just on some level to say like, okay, well, like what's the overarching purpose of this series? Who's the arch nemesis? What's the big obstacle? And I think for my own good, I've let that go pretty early in this series. I was like, I'm going to accept the kind of episodic TV nature of this and just enjoy each episode, each season for what it is. Um, and then the end of volume 4,
And that's what I'm just gonna say. Like
it was like as soon as I let it go,
not volume four. What are we on volume?
or
Well,
five and six, yeah, it
five
was
and
at the
six,
end
yeah.
of 6, yeah.
That's what I was going to say was that this was an interesting construct. Again, we have this idea of like, here's a very political, overtly political arc in the beginning, and then we got this very just overly supernatural aspect. This is about his powers, about the origin of his powers. We get this strange new character, the strange new figure that shows up, and we are meant to think, is this guy just some crazy nut job? Is he like the guy in Jury Duty, some paranoid schizophrenic? But yet we see this guy does have some sort of ability. When he first shows up and he's whoever he's talking to is his like AI assistant, the Alexa in his head or whatever. He's able to access the internet to learn what's going on. So he has some ability. So are some of the things he's saying true? Is he from an actual parallel dimension Earth?
Well,
Are
no,
these
see,
things,
that was the thing is like,
Yeah.
okay, so uh question number 1 was, is he a time traveler? Because
Yeah.
that's the red herring they set you up with.
Yes.
And as a reader, I was like, whatever it is, it's not time travel. The fact
Yeah.
that all the characters are guessing that means that there's
Can't
just
be.
no
Yeah.
way
Yeah. Can't
it's
be.
time.
Yeah.
There's no way it's time travel. The era we live in now with everything everywhere all at once and Marvel Phase 4 and
All
everything else,
multiverse. Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, clearly he's going to be a multiversal character. And I was like, wait,
Yeah.
that wasn't really, unless you're like a Flash reader, that wasn't really as big of a thing
Well,
20 years ago.
well, but if you were a comic book reader, yes, and
Yeah, I guess like
well,
Crisis on Infinite Earths. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say.
yeah.
We talked about that last week. That there was a specific flashback to what June, July, 1986, where they're talking about,
Things
when
getting
he's saying like,
erased
it,
from the
yeah,
yeah.
those things
No,
don't happen anymore.
that's a good
Yeah,
tag. Okay.
they're laying the groundwork, the idea of multiple Earths, multiple parallel Earths, and there's no question that for a DC fan, and on a DC label, that they would tap into that, and you're laying that groundwork for. But yeah, you're right. Those ideas were comic book people ideas.
Right.
Even 20 years ago, that idea was, the idea of the parallel Earth, that is just slightly different than ours. One or two
Right.
things seem different. Yeah,
And I think you've got one
an
other
idea that people
remote
had.
option that I think would have been another comic booky theory, but there's not a lot of evidence. But when they say what he does and where he's from, these in visual effects, I immediately thought Mysterio.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like comic Mysterio.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I guess MCU Mysterio too, but more comic Mysterio, like
he's stagecraft.
someone who, yeah, stagecraft
Mhm.
using technology, props, deception, theatricality, and can make himself seem very daunting or powerful,
Yeah.
without actually having any actual powers or ability.
Yeah. Well, maybe the electric discharge is something he could figure out how to do. So that's like the real thing. But everything else could be, no, yeah, that's
Be
possible. But
holograms,
again,
projections,
yeah.
without
But
actual teleporting. And then I
that's a
thought,
Marvel character. We're not tapping into that side of the street here in this
well,
one.
and that's, yeah, I would say that's why it's a much less likely, and they've
Yeah,
not really left any breadcrumbs for it, other
no,
than I just thought, like, okay, so based on not reading beyond this, if you can partition your mind like that, at this point in the reading, would your primary guess be the Zeller that they located in New Zealand is this Earth's version of the guy he met? Or is it in fact the same guy and he has found a way to make it appear that he's still in New Zealand this whole time
no.
and never left?
I think the read that I had at the time and the high I would have here is, yeah, that the Zello they find, who happens to work at Weta, which at the time would have been a big deal. He's
Right.
this is 2003, so he'd be hard at work at finishing up Return of the King at this point. August, we're August 2003, which we'll talk about. That's the actual date of the New York blackout in '03. So he'd have been hard at work finishing Return of the King, which means probably not taking days off where he can fly out to New York or whatnot. No, I absolutely took that as that is our version. That's
Right. And that guy's
Earth
not going to know
Prime.
anything about,
Yeah, it's
and
Earth
in
Prime
fact,
or Earth 616. Yeah.
if you know anything about multiversal stuff, that guy's the least likely to know because you
Yes.
try to avoid running into your multiversal self,
Yeah.
unless it's a Flash movie or something.
Well, and
In
again,
case
so
you're on a buddy cop adventure with yourself.
yeah, you never know. But given what we the readers have information to about Zeller that our characters don't, is that first scene when he shows up and he talks to the lady on the stoop, right? And he's trying to find the information, and he's like, "Tell me what happened in the World Trade Center," and he gets the full download. So he's able to get information through whatever computer is connected to his head. So we, the reader, know that's real. More so
Right.
than our characters do. So I think we're better primed to accept what he's saying is true, than Mitchell, his mother, and Kremlin, and all those guys are. We've seen more. Of course, then he just disappears. As we see him. I don't want to say disintegrate or whatever, but we see him basically res out of existence, which I guess you're meant to assume, if you believe what he's saying, was that he only had a certain amount of time in this dimension on this earth, right? Time ran out. He gets zapped back to his own
Which did
place.
this whole thing with this guy give you like real precursor vibes for Paper Girls?
A little,
Like
a
the
little.
stranger showing up in a weird costume,
Yeah, yeah,
kind of speaking a different language and then getting zapped out after a certain amount of time.
yeah.
I was like,
That's
ooh, I
time
feel like
travel, but
this is
yeah, there
right.
are
I was like,
elements
but I
there.
feel like this is the first draft of
Yeah.
Paper Girls.
Well, again, these are, these are comic book tropes that, creators like Brian K. Vaughan and Tony Harris, they have known and read about. It's in their blood, and they're just trying to iterate on, what's their version of that. And I could see them having a conversation of like, okay, well, this is set in our world, a version of our world. We're already in a slightly alternate dimension of our society. You know, all the events still happen. 9/11 still mostly happened. We still went to war in the Middle East again after, even though one tower got saved, the fallout was still very similar. So how would this world, with wherever, I mean, and at this point, I don't even know if they've decided, if they know the origin of Mitchell's powers. Maybe they had some series Bible that was like, we know exactly what it is, and we're going to piece these things out. Or what I imagine they probably did was they made that up as they were going along.
That's
Hey,
interesting because
because
I feel like if BKV was writing this now, I think he would know at least
see,
in big bullet points,
see,
like it's
I
supernatural or it's whatever, it's
see,
whatever.
I,
But I
I,
don't think he's like a detailed mapper.
maybe not. I would agree with that if that's what the story was about. If the story was
Exactly. Yeah.
about, and said
Well,
the
and that's
fact
my
that
thing is like I never needed to know. Like I
exactly,
have
yeah,
not been curious. Like, oh, is it alien? Is it future? Is it robots? Is
yeah,
it whatever? I'm like, I don't really care. It doesn't. It's kind of tangential to the
yeah,
story.
and I would agree because I don't believe Ex Machina is about that. It's about someone with the powers, with his history, trying to navigate as the mayor, as the it is a political book that has those kind of undertones and overtones, not the other way around. So because of that, because it was, I think, less, I believe, and I think you agree, it's less essential to the storytelling, that I think that they can make it up as they go along, be like, hey, what if we did this here, and started seeding some of the stuff in, knowing that, the book is about him, yeah, trying to deal with, do we legalize pot? Trying to deal with, what do we do about school vouchers? Things like that. How do we deal with the protest rally? An anti-war rally versus a rally for the KKK, things like that. What are the limits of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and all that? That's what the book is about. It's a commentary from a commentary on the near past from the near future, right? Again, these
Right.
books are coming out in 04, 05, 06, 04 to 2010, and they're set in 2002 to 2005. So it's commentary on the world that we had. It's not about the superhero part. That's just because these guys are comic book nerds, and they can throw that stuff in there. So yeah, I'm with you. And
Right. In
while
fact, your main character is going out of his way regularly to not make it a
yeah,
superhero plot.
exactly, yeah, yeah. But I find that stuff interesting. And not that I disliked that bit there. I like getting those breadcrumbs in there because for me, it's in the column of, oh, that's nice to know. It's not
Right.
essential.
Yeah. No, that's exactly how I feel about it. And I expect the book to pivot back to an issue of the day for a while because that's what the bread and butter of the series is.
Or at least for the next arc, right?
Right. For the next arc.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. So like another 3 issue, like here's
yeah,
a political issue
yeah.
type thing.
And we'll probably
Um,
get it, and it'll probably be infused with that underlying story of whatever January is doing with Kremlin, right? So it's the superhero part, but it's not about how he gets his powers, this overlying threat. It's just Kremlin's motivation, So it's the whatever political crises he has to deal with, underlined by the fact that Kremlin's out here trying to pull strings to get him to quit being a politician. I'm with you. You expect that because that is, at this point, that's the draw for me. I want to see how he handles that stuff as a mayor, as a politician. And also I like going back and being like, what were the big issues of the day? What were the things you were talking about then? And oh, look, there's still issues now. I go back to that
I
the
am
special
curious.
with Jean Paul Leon.
I'm
You
very
know,
curious if anyone is listening to this and they are Gen Z. I'm so curious how the political side of this hits you. Like, does this all just feel cringe, or is
yeah.
this like an interesting history lesson?
Yeah. Do we all seem as incompetent as it seems like we were when you have some knowledge about it and we look back on where we were
Especially
20
when
years ago?
like you and I think are fairly smart guys, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, and we're both kind of like, yeah, that is pretty much what it's like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is hard not to look back and just be like, God, we should have been smarter, or at least we should have been less dumb, you know.
Right.
But then you strain. Like, I know for me, I strain, and you put yourself back in there. Remember where I was in my life at that time, and thinking like, did I have the experience to not be dumb at that point? You know, did I
No.
have the capacity to think that way?
I'm
And of
answering for
course,
myself, and the answer was no.
well, the answer
Yeah.
is no. Of course, I want to believe that I could have, right? Obviously, I want to believe that if I had the information I had now, 20 years on, that I had 20, that if I could have given to myself 20 years ago, that I would be at the same place and I'd be able to come to those conclusions and that understanding. But knowing the truth is no, because 20 years ago, you're an idiot, you know? And I don't know how much of I am or am not an idiot now, but like I at least know I've learned something in the past 20 years. I have a greater understanding of things because I have more experience with things, because there's been greater representation in the overall world. We've seen and experienced more. The more open and accepting you can be, the more ideas that come in. And 20 years ago, we weren't ready for that, especially coming off of the events of 9/11. Again, this book being reactionary to a specific moment. Like that threw our society and our country into just like some really terrible places,
Yeah.
that we had to dig ourselves out of. And any other sort of even like tangentially progressive movements just got shifted to the sidelines because it was all about the war on terror. That's everything that was. It was terrorism, terrorism, terrorism. And everything that came out of that through Homeland Security, TSA, multiple wars in the Middle East, all of that stuff was that dominated for so long. And then you get to the point where it's like, well, like other things going on here. But that's where we were so wrapped up in that. Yeah, I'm with you. If there's some Gen Z readers out there, listeners out there, like, please don't judge us too harshly, I guess,
Yeah. Judge us by our best intentions rather than
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
our worst. Which
You,
I just
oh,
almost accidentally quoted. Well, it's like an inverse of. I'm gonna find that quote.
oh, yeah. I know what you're
Is the
talking about.
only is it the only George W. Bush quote I ever use.
Yeah.
Uh, which
The idea of,
honestly, what's more fitting than me misremembering a quote when the correct attribution goes to George W. Bush?
yeah, that's,
Okay. Yes, he said too often we judge other groups by their worst examples while judging ourselves by our best intentions. But I think that was in a book, so it may have been ghost written.
it may have been, but
And then I would like to say I'm patting myself on the back for appreciating a good insight wherever it comes from.
yes, yeah. By you making that quote, you are the living embodiment of that quote by bringing that up.
Yeah,
Yes.
I am the Mitch 100, reaching
Yeah.
across the aisle, the best of
Yes.
both
Yes.
sides,
Absolutely.
independent, and that was
Giving props where props are due.
yeah,
But yeah,
one
there
prop,
is
not singular, one prop.
okay, fine, not plural.
But yeah, we got to get past the smoke thing.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you do you have any thoughts on I was going to call it the standalone issue, but it's literally called standalone.
Yeah.
It's a standalone issue called standalone issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me felt like one of the specials.
It really did. Yes.
Not in a bad way.
Yeah.
But it was just like
did
your
you
main
enjoy
character
that?
is not in it.
Yeah,
I did enjoy it. No, I actually really enjoyed that one.
Interesting. I don't know if I didn't. It wasn't my favorite, and here's why. I
It hit
think,
me on about the 18th page. I was like, oh, this is not part of anything.
yeah,
This
we're
is
we're, we're
just
filling in, and I guess part of me is maybe as I've read this, and especially reading it so much more closely now for this. When you think about the cast of characters that surrounds Mitchell, um, I don't feel like they being BKV and Tony Harris. I don't know if they've put as much work into the supporting characters to make them really kind of full as you would see in some of their later work when they're a little older and a little better at this. Not that they've done a bad job here, but it's not that I don't really care about them in terms of every time these characters show up, they're all pretty much the same every time. Kremlin is the angry old Russian guy who's
I
single-minded focus.
agree with everything you just
Yeah,
said. I
and
think the difference here is that so had if that was the last issue in trade 5, I
mhm,
would have been like, what a worthless issue. But since I went straight to the next issues where you really see
okay.
what a little terrier he is for 100,
Well, yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
oh, okay. I see where the fierce diehard loyalty, because it's one thing to say that again and again and again, like, I've got your back, man, I've got your
yeah,
back, man, I got your back, man. And then another thing to see, like, oh, this is how he operates. He notices when someone is like observing him from a distance. Like,
yeah,
he's military observant, he's clever, he can like lie and trick people, and you know, he's just kind of always on. And then when like, he's like, oh, this, drop me at my mom's house, don't worry about it, you can just go. And as soon as something happens, he charges through the door because there's no way he's leaving.
yeah.
Like, that moment landed for me so much more because of that standalone issue.
Well,
So the standalone issue by itself, not a good issue.
and
Um,
so I
but informing the story that came after it, I liked it.
100% agree about that. I guess the way I was reading it was up until that point, I don't really care about Bradbury's backstory.
100%. The
There was
only
there was
person
enough
whose backstory I want is it Wiley? Weil?
Wiley. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
Wiley.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Well, because
he's the most interesting guy on
yeah, yeah.
every page.
He is he's the smartest political reason voice, I think. But the role he's cast in isn't it. Sometimes it's just to be the black guy in the room, and sometimes it's to be the guy who recognizes that he's the only black guy in the room. Like that's his role. Journal, or now January, their role was to be the 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 quote unquote youth voice, right? The outside that seems idealistic, but then everyone's like, oh yeah, maybe the young kids have a good idea. Bradbury's whole thing was, he reminds me of John Favreau's Happy Hogan. You know,
Yes,
the
that's exactly who it
yeah,
reminds me of.
that
Yeah,
that he's the guy that no matter what, at the drop of the hat, the first thing he's doing is kicking the door down and tackling his guy to get into safety. You know,
right.
and so they hadn't put the work in prior. And so when we get this backstory and I'm reading it, it's like, I don't really care about this. But then you're right. It does
It
inform
felt
who
out of
he is.
order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess my question is, was it worth having a standalone episode for him like this? Or is that something they could have spread out early on so we see and we build and we understand, oh, this is why he's so loyal, as opposed to just, we're going to dump this all into one issue right here that again is part of the main one, is not a special. It is a regular issue, for lack of a better word. Was that the best option? Was there a better way to do it? And I'm not saying I have an answer to that. It always shocks me, like, oh right, it's the Bradbury issue again, and we just get these
Right.
little vignettes of his
It's
early
an
life, his
editorial
military
problem
life.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um,
I just wonder if there's maybe a better way to have deployed that and sprinkle some of that stuff earlier on. So all the characters are a little more rounded, you know? Sorry, I think
which
Wiley
I
is the
think,
most rounded of his non-Mitchell characters, but everyone is still fairly one-dimensional right now.
but I'll say, at least to his credit, at least he's not just spamming us with new characters endlessly.
That is true.
Because I think that's where it really rubs me raw, where I'm like, I can deal with some like one dimensional. There's a lot of, there's a lot of Ed and Larry's here, to use our
Yes.
West Wing
West
language.
Wing comp. Yeah.
It's like, okay, you have like 6, 7, 8, 9 main characters in the West Wing.
Yeah.
Ed and Larry being in meetings, throwing a line
Yeah.
in here and there.
Yeah.
You don't need their backstory. You don't
Yeah.
need more about them.
Yeah.
Um,
Because they represent everyone else in the White
right. They're
House.
the stand-in for
Yeah. For
everyone
all the people
whose
not our
name,
main
everyone who
characters.
doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But if, in like season 5 of the West Wing, where they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks.
Yes.
And it's like, here's a, new assistant for Toby for 5 episodes, and here's
Yep.
a new intern for Josh. And, we're just going to try a bunch of, one-dimensional characters who have like one note lines of, reasoning or humor or whatever. And yeah, we'll just see what works. And ultimately, none of it works. Like, none of those characters stuck around.
Well, yeah, because
Um,
you're right. They're brought in with a single focus to garner a specific reaction from our main characters, right? And so so our main characters can play off of this very standard tropish character. And then once that's done, you can't really evolve that character because that character started out as a one note. And I agree with you. We're not getting that here. We're not getting random important characters like new people for them for that BKV and Tony Harris are throwing in here. There is the one new character is January, but we understand her already. We very quickly they developed her. We understand who she is, why she's here, and what role she's filling. There's a very specific purpose to that. Versus, yeah, here's just another person in the mayoral office that is now going to be an antagonist for a couple issues because we need someone to be on the other side of a political debate or something like that. Like that kind of thing can wear very thin in the story because you just know this person is just cannon fodder to be on the other side of a debate, right?
right. They're a
They're
straw
not
man. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're not
Especially in
bothering
a
to do
political
that, which
thing.
is good. Exactly. Yeah, of the political side. Yeah. So the question is, are we going to see more of them on the supernatural side? Again, we have our what we'll call him our parallel dimensional visitor here, and then there's also McPherson out there, right? We know that character exists, and we have hints that he's still alive, and that all these things are connected somehow. All of these things are have some point of origin. So, does that build to a head? Is that what the main antagonist is going to end up being up for the story? Those are breadcrumbs in there. And again, I think like you and I've said, that's interesting just from a story standpoint, but in terms of this specific comic, it's not what's driving me to pick up the next issue, keep reading.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm glad we had that discussion about standalone because, yeah, as I was reading it, I was like, meh. But since it was immediately followed by him demonstrating the traits that we learned about him,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was like you made the most of that once it was done. It would have been a better special or annual or whatever, and not had it be in the sequence because it's like, yeah, that's a skip on reread.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't need to get to it unless it were the kind of thing that we had discussed a few seasons back with Descender, right? Where we're going to do a whole bunch of one shots in a row. And this whole thing is going to be one shots. And we're going to build our story around here's an issue on all of the people around Mitchell. And we're gonna de-emphasize Mitchell. He's gonna be a supporting character for the next 4 or 5 issues. And it's all gonna be one shots. That kind of thing could work, right? Like here's a Bradbury issue, here's a Kremlin issue, here's a Wiley issue. Then maybe here's a Commissioner Angotti issue, something like that. And then like you end it with the January issue, right? And then that reveal ends with she's working with Kremlin to subvert the Mitchell's his term, that sort of thing. That kind of setup I think can work. When it's just the one there, I think it does stand out in the story. And you're right. Going back through it now, when I come back to it, like, oh, you're right. This is the Bradbury story. Let me skip ahead to that because I know what's coming next.
Yeah. Which I will say my main complaint with this series is the time jumping plot mechanic, I think, is a little overdone. And it's something that
Yeah.
bothers me because this was, I think, on the early end of that trend. But now every storyteller does it. Every storyteller's like, uh,
And
here's three different timelines. We're going to tell them all at once to just kind of drag the story out a little bit.
yeah,
But I think it flattens character development, especially when you see these like side characters in '01 and '03 and '04.
and they're not any
They're
different.
basically the same, right?
Yeah, and
Because it was
only
all being
Mitchell's different.
written
Yes.
at the same time.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like,
And
you got to be pretty clever to pull that off and have it be convincing.
and I 100% agree with that. Obviously, at this point, they're pot committed. They can't change that. They can't change that aspect there. But I'm with you. There is a sense I think that I get as a reader, um, whenever you see that mechanic, uh, there's a bit of anxiety on my end to feel like how important are these days? Like, do I need to be
Yeah. Oh,
tracking?
yeah.
Do I need to be
It drives
tracking?
me crazy.
Yeah,
It drives me crazy.
and I
And I'm
think the
like,
only
I don't even remember, is he mayor now or is
yeah.
he
Well, so
Great
the
Machine?
only
What was
thing
the cutoff date?
the only thing you have to only thing that you don't need to pay attention to is that what I believe is true is the current day timeline that advances chronologically.
Right.
That every time you see another date that is, like I said, we start in '02, the end of deluxe volume 2 last week, that, ends with Journal's death. That is early '03, I believe. And that when we start back here, when we see introduction of January, I believe it's July '03. So a couple months have passed. And then I mentioned when the blackout happens, that is August 14th, 2003, which was the date of the actual blackout in New York City in 2003. So those dates move chronologically. It's jumping back to the days, where we got a flashback here to 1977, and we get the various flashbacks to 2000, 2001, things like that. Um, it, you're right. There is an anxiety of like, how important are the specific days? How important, how much do you have to clock exactly when we're jumping back to, or is it really just about here's something from the past, here's something in the present timeline? And I lean more towards that the specific dates, September 11th notwithstanding, the specific dates we jump back to are just to show this is where he is in his journey. I think I think because September 11th is a hard date, that anytime you jump back to March 2001,
Right.
June
Yeah.
2001,
That's my
December
anger
2000,
is,
yeah, yeah,
before or after.
exactly. Those don't matter. It's just he's building up towards quitting as the Great Machine to ultimately come back for one day when he was needed, when he was actually needed. So those specific dates, I think you can kind of gloss over, but for me, the way I read story like this is I want to check all those dates, and as I said, as talked about last week, when they're in the comic shop in 1986 talking about Crisis, I was like, well, let me double check here. When did the final issue of Crisis come out? And sure enough, it was a few months prior to the date that they had here. Not that I would expect these guys to make a mistake when it comes to that kind of continuity. So I'm not trying to play gotcha on them or something, but there's still a part of me that like, I need to check this to make sure, the blackout. And, did they put it on the exact same day in 2003? Oh, yes, they did. They put it on the exact same day as the actual blackout that happened in New York. So those kinds of things where, again, I'm not trying to be an ombudsman here. I'm not trying to fact check them, but
Right.
it's
And
the
even
way
if
that
they
my
did,
mind,
it's like,
yeah,
oh, it's a different universe. You
exactly,
always
yeah.
got that cop out,
But
but
then there's the thing of like, well, why is this little thing different? Why'd you change that bit? And the answer is, well, they made a mistake. They screwed up. They had the wrong source, kind of thing. But they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's on those like, really wildly unimportant things. This minutia that doesn't really matter. But again, the way that my mind works as a reader is I want to clock every single one of those. And so I'm with you. It is tiring to jump back and forth, but at this point,
well,
this is what they do. So
right.
yeah,
Although my last thing on the time jumping is now I'm wondering, I think I'm very open to the fact that this is just the side effect of binging it like this. But does it feel like they keep returning to the 9/11 well a little too much? Like this last depiction where he lands the
Well,
airplane in traffic is really cool, but I'm like, what if you just
yeah,
had one chronological issue that was everything that happened on 9/11 and
I
you
know.
drop that halfway through the series?
I think it feels it this way because if I remember correctly, Deluxe Volume One only had the first issue talk about it, and I want to say in Deluxe Volume Two there was only one reference to it, which was him trying to catch people who were jumping out the windows, and that was like that was like
Hmm.
that was like a PTSD kind of dream thing. He remembering that, but here we had there were two
Yeah,
separate interests. And so I think it felt like more there because they went back to the same event twice. The same specific moment twice, right?
yeah. I was just
The
thinking in the first one, I think there was one where he said something like, "I've still got time to save that second tower," and I think there was a flashback to it in
oh, there might
the
have been two.
crystal
Yeah,
ball fortune teller episode.
there might have
Uh,
been more there.
I
I
don't
you
know.
know,
It feels like I know that that's like the pivotal event that everything's kind
yeah.
of anchored around, but it's kind of the reductio 9/11, politicians argument. They're
Yeah.
doing that with like the emotional heft of the story, and it doesn't need it. Like I'm invested in him as a character and what's happening in the world, uh, you know, without
I'm
having to
with you
remind me that
there.
9/11 was bad.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I do
But if I was reading this over the course of like 3 years, I don't think it would feel like I'm getting 9/11 spammed.
well, yeah, and I get
So
it.
I think
If
in
you
single issue format, they're using it quite sparingly.
yeah, yeah, and that's where I was going. I think because it seemed like they were so close back to back. When if we were to check those publication dates, I mean, I'm sure there was a gap between arcs too, so it wasn't just like monthly. So it could have been like 7 months in between those issues. You know, where again the first one we see is him trying to deal with the fighter jet, and then the second one is him landing the plane, right? Which happened chronologically before the fighter jet showed up. You know,
Right.
because he's in that moment he's calling Bradbury and said, "Listen, we can see he's taxed and he's saying I called them from help. I'm trying to clear traffic and we know why." So I think I, I think that's a little more nature of the binge read. I
Yeah.
believe so. I think so. I
And I
think
think
so.
that's fair.
Yeah, because again, these guys have to know, and
Well, and
and
it's
maybe
not written for binge reading,
well,
obviously.
yes,
I mean, it
but I'm
was
saying
written as a
may,
monthly.
yeah, maybe I'm granting BKV and Tony Harris a little more agency on this one, but they have to know every time they go back to 9/11, it evokes response from the audience. That
Right.
every time they show a different part of that um I don't want to say they lose the reader, but that possibility is there, right? And every time you jump back to September
It
11th,
pulls us back to our world
it pulls
rather
you
than the
out
world of
of their
story.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though we're seeing this fantastical thing of a guy who with a jetpack who can
And
talk
it's
to the
different.
plane and
Like they
get to
still have
land.
a tower,
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
single
But
tower. So,
but it pulls the reader out of the story. So I think yeah, if you were to look at which issues have direct reference and allusion to September 11th and look at when how they parse that out, I don't think it would seem as prolific and maybe heavy-handed that it does seem in the binge read model. And again, I haven't fact checked that and said maybe I'm giving them a little more agency on that than they deserve, but I just have to think that they're not that reckless,
no, and
with that
I don't
deployment
think he's that emotionally
manipulative.
manipulative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Even though, when it comes to killing characters, he definitely is.
Oh no, yeah, he
He
does.
can
Oh no,
twist the
yeah.
knife anytime he wants with
Oh no,
killing characters,
the
but those are his characters to kill.
yes,
Whereas 9/11 was a real thing.
yes, it's
Uh,
that isn't his event to just
Manipulate. Yeah.
to tell the audience how they should or shouldn't feel about that, even in his fictionalized version of it. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So I think the only thing we really haven't talked about in depth is the power down arc. Now we've talked about,
yeah.
100's respite from having the powers.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we talked a little bit about, what the reasonable guesses for this character are, like this, the guy who shows up
the
Zeller.
cause of the blackout. Yeah, yeah.
Right, the cause of the blackout. And we've talked about, his bulldog companion. There's not much to say about his mom, right? Like she's just kind of a mom.
She's there. I mean, we saw her. We obviously were
We
introduced to
saw her
her.
in the teens, yeah.
Oh no, well, we
15,
saw her.
16,
He
somewhere in
pulls her
there.
out of wherever she was living, kind of explicitly away from Mitchell and what he was doing in New York. But obviously now he's brought her into the fold, had put her up in place in New York, and we see that she's out here kind of hanging out with Kremlin, you know, um, kind of to Mitchell's dismay. It's a little bit of like, you don't want your mom out there dating, and a little bit of like, hey, me and Kremlin aren't really that cool right now. It's kind of a double-edged sword for him. But yeah, we know that she in her youth was a political idealist, you know, and then she lost some of that. And it sounds like now that she's back in the game a little bit, maybe she's going down that road again some more, that idealism of her youth maybe has come back now that she's back in the city. But there really isn't much there. She at least for this story is just a plot device, right? She's there to be kidnapped just like Kremlin.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like we're not saying enough about that story arc, but I don't really know what else to say about it because you can't lead into what we haven't covered yet.
Yeah, you're right. There is the idea of it really comes down to is what do you, the reader, believe is true? What's happening here? Is it, the prevailing thought in story, the characters in the story, the prevailing thought is that there was alien tech, right? Some sort of alien device, alien relic that gave Mitchell his powers and subsequently McPherson. They believe the Zeller guy is crazy, just like the guy who was in jury duty. But yet he is saying things that I think you kind of see on Mitchell's face, whether he's saying it or not. It's almost like he has a spark of recognition, and we see throughout this arc he has these moments where it's like he's becoming overpowered, right? Where he almost faints and kind of loses control for a second. And so there's a sense that not only does he work too hard and too long on the political end, but maybe that's having an effect physically, more so on him because he has these extra powers, and what is the cause of that? Is it because, what Zeller said that, that quote unquote, they're coming for him or whatever threat he says is looming, is that actually happening? Is that why his powers are kind of on the fritz? So really this power down, this aspect, this story arc is really about setting up some questions. It's meant to prime the reader and to provoke some just, hey, what is actually going on here? And I guess your mileage varies on that depending on how much you feel that that's important to the story.
Right. Yeah.
And
no, I think that's well said.
And you and I don't think it's as critical to the storytelling. So it's like, well, these questions are kind of cool, but do we need to discuss them? Because it's not really about that. It's like, I want to see, what the next political issue is. What's the next hot button 2003 topic they're going to cover? That's more interesting, I think, to us right now.
Well, and the Kremlin thing, it's like, I think if this were a superhero book, it would be like, how is he going to get him back into the suit? And the way I'm reading this, which I think is the way it's meant to be read, is like this guy is eventually going to cross the line and screw things up politically for 100. Like,
yes,
he's going to overstep his bounds.
Yes,
he's going to do something like domestic terrorism, and then he's going to be painted with the same brush as 100 because it's like, oh, this guy's a known associate.
Yes,
100, and it's like I'm looking at this from Mitchell's political side, not from the superhero side, and I think that's got to be the correct way to read it.
I agree. Yes, because of honestly, I think because of Kremlin, because of his storyline, because he is set up as in the way he is. That he's got to be. We're meant to be viewing Mitchell as a politician, not as a superhero.
Right.
So everything that happens to him, happens in the story, I believe I'm with you there. We're supposed to view through that lens. You're not supposed to see him as the superhero, who's going to come out and who's going to come to the rescue, like he did on September 11th. That was a one-time thing. You're supposed to view him as what is Mitchell Hundred, the politician, the independent mayor? What does he do? How does he view this? How does this affect his ability to get reelected? Not how does this affect his ability to put the jetpack on again? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, do you have anything else for this deluxe edition?
I don't know if I do. I think
I gotta say, we are like clockwork discussing this thing.
yeah.
I don't think I think that deluxe was the perfect way to do this.
Yeah.
I noticed we're clocking about 75 minutes per episode
Yeah.
for 2 trades. And I think that's what we shoot for in terms of length of the podcast.
Yeah.
And I think 2 trades gives you, 3 or 4 storylines to kind of juggle around and talk about. None of them, but without the overarching thing, you're not really guessing where you're going next. You're just kind of looking backward and saying like, look where we've been.
Yeah.
And then we get the time capsule element of it being 20
yeah,
years
absolutely.
since it was written and set.
I think there's something to this. Isn't the hard stricture of the story, but something that I noticed reading this one is that if you look back at both of or all 3 of the deluxe editions we've done so far, there is this kind of loose sense of like, first arc is the political arc, second arc is the quote unquote superhero supernatural part. You think back to the first deluxe trade, right? What was the opening story there? It was the
painting,
the art, the art painting, this freedom of speech kind of thing. How does it deal with that?
And then the snow drivers,
and then the snow plowers there. But what was also the seeded into the back half of that volume was the graffiti tags in the subway, right? Which was the wife of his NSA guy who had the relic that gave him his powers and drove her crazy, right? She killed her family, did all that.
Right.
And so that's like, oh, what is, how does this tie into his powers?
Completely forgot about that.
Yeah, but that was the tag arc there,
right.
With the use of tag, and so we got a little less of that second time around in volume 2, but volume 2, we got more of his backstory, and we got more of that actually with the specials because of the 2 specials that Chris Sprouse drew, were the McPherson story. So again, that is another part of the, what are his powers? Where do they come from? Wait, why does this other guy seem to have powers that are similar, but they're different because, they're like a different aspect of it, one guy's machine, one guy's animal. So, it's like they keep seeding that in the way that we're reading it in the back half of the book. You read a front half that's going to be more political leaning, what's happening at the mayor's office. And then the second half of the book, the deluxe edition, is these little more sprinkles of, but what's really going on with Mitchell? What are his powers actually happening? Is there some larger threat? Not saying there is a threat. It's posing the question, is there something larger?
Right.
And maybe if there is, does that mean Kremlin's right? If there's some larger threat coming, if Mitchell was supposed to do and supposed to be doing more, does that mean Kremlin is right? That he can do more because he has these powers? He shouldn't be a politician. He should be a superhero. And it's those things they sprinkle in on the back end. So yeah, by reading it in the deluxe edition, and I wonder if they planned it that way of like, hey, we're going to have an arc that's politics, an arc that's superhero, and
I mean,
we're gonna
it can't be accidental, but it could also be like they're just rotating their tires basically. They're like,
it could be, yeah,
okay,
it could,
yeah, like
it could
we
have
did
been
this, which is what we do first, but we want to touch on the superhero side of things.
Yeah, and they could have accidentally fallen into it and then realized, oh, this rhythm feels good, this vibe feels good, and it does make. I agree, it makes for a really good read in the deluxe edition because you get all aspects of the story every time. You get all parts of the story. I think I
say that, but I hope it continues to be true.
Yeah, yeah. One of the quotes, I think one of the pull quotes on volume 3 on the cover, I think it was from IGN. It was like the West Wing meets Watchmen, which is like, that's super reductive crap, but also not entirely wrong. You know,
Right.
it's this idea of because
No,
they
that's the
are.
elevator pitch, right?
Yeah,
It's
it
like,
totally is because this isn't because as much superhero story as there is here, it is really a deconstructing of superheroes, right? We're showing how a guy stops being a superhero and what happens after the fact. So it isn't just like it's not West Wing and Superman. You're right. It is this idea that yeah, we're getting inside the mind. It's who do you trust? Who is this person that is saving you, and why would you trust them? And we're getting to see that in depth here of who Mitchell Hundred is. So yeah, that elevator pitch is fun and it's catchy, and I wouldn't be shocked if more than one person said that to someone about this book back in the day, like, and that's what grabbed them, But yeah, by putting them together this way, getting all flavors of the story, I think is beneficial, even if, as you've pointed out here, maybe there is some fatigue on some aspects of that binge read, reading issues in quick succession that maybe weren't thought of as being as such when they were being created and published.
right.
There is something you lose. There are things you lose and things you gain by reading only in collection versus as released in single issue. So there's positive and negatives there, but I think overall it's a benefit to the story.
For sure.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, with all that said, we will thank you for listening to Deluxe Volume 3 of Ex Machina, and we will see you next week for Deluxe Volume 4, which will be trades 7 and 8,
Yep, pretty
and
much.
single issue 30 through 38?
It is 30 through
39?
40.
30 through 40. Okay.
Yeah, so it is a full 10 issues. No there is still one special left, special 4. That's included in Deluxe Volume 5. So
All right.
yeah,
That's
issues
pretty
30
clean.
through
30
40
through
is
40.
next week. Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
All right. Well, as always, find us on social media. Find our link tree in the episode description, as well as a link to our website. You can find a little more detail on this episode. You can find our other episodes, our creator interviews, all of that good stuff. You can follow us on all of the social media places, and shout out to us. You may get a shout out up in the episode, especially since we're kind of recording this one in real time. We're not that far ahead scheduling wise. So I was able to call out a tweet from last week in this week's episode.
Yes.
Which maybe
doesn't always happen, but sometimes it works
showed
out.
a little bit more than I meant to. That real-time call out.
Too much behind the curtain, Mike. Too much behind the curtain.
Yeah. So anyway, whether you're listening on iTunes or Spotify or Pocket Cast or wherever you might be, if you have the ability to give us a 5-star rating, we very much appreciate it. And with that, we will see you next week.
Peace.